Katie, I'm so excited to have you today on the podcast. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for the invite. Pleasure to be with you.
So, I've known you for quite a while, but why don't you introduce yourself beyond what I shared in the bio? What are a few major life and work milestones?
So I found sustainability quite early on. I had studied law and had found it quite dry until I found in the last couple of years international relations and international human rights law, and I knew that that was the path and the direction that I wanted to go in. I joined KPMG as a graduate in their quite newly formed at the time sustainability department and worked across a range of different sectors, developing strategy and policies and programs. But after a few years, realized that I needed to get that experience of actually being out at operations, implementing these, and understanding the impact within a local context, and how we could actually do this better. So I moved to South America, and I spent a few years living and working in Argentina, where both of my daughters were born, and then moved to Anglo American's copper business in Peru. And I lived and worked in Peru for 5 years, initially as part of the copper team, and then moving to a group role, so working with teams in Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Peru, on community development, community engagement, and a whole range of social performance issues. And that was just an incredible experience and really, really life-changing. And South America and Peru in particular will always be my second home and for my family as well. And then I had the opportunity to move back to another part of the group, to the De Beers business. And my role there was really about working right the way through from with the mining teams across Southern Africa and Canada, so Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, on delivery of our 2030 social and environmental goals and all of our programs of work in the social and environmental space. But then all the way through also to working with the consumer and brand teams who were working across the key consumer markets across the US, India, China, on the consumer-facing side of that, and how to really engage consumers in being part of the delivery of our sustainability ambition. And part of that involved working with the most amazing partners and developing really creative partnerships with amazing organizations like National Geographic, like UN Women, that spanned from impact in the countries where we operated all the way through to engaging on the consumer side. And that took me up. I did that for about 6 years in De Beers, and that took me up to my current role today.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I knew very early on that I wanted to work in sustainability. And I started working at KPMG. They had just started their sustainability department.
So, what is your role now? What are you doing now professionally?
Yeah, so I moved from when I came back from South America. I moved to another part of Anglo American. So I went from the copper business based in Peru, and then a group social performance role working with all of the operations in South America. I then moved back for a role in De Beers, our head of social performance role in De Beers, which grew over a few years to being the senior vice president for sustainable impact. So my role, it was a fascinating role, and I think quite unique in the mining industry, where I got to work with all of our mining operations and our teams in mining, but also work through the whole value chain, connecting that work on the ground to consumers and retail and the brand, and developing some partnerships that with amazing organizations like National Geographic and United Nations Women, working on issues across our value chain. And just last year, middle of last year, I moved back to Anglo American to be our group head of sustainability. So my team really looks. So we have the climate team, human rights, nature, and all of our work around sustainability strategy, how that keeps evolving, how that's embedded through our governance processes, our certifications, and our reporting, which of course is a growing area as well on data and disclosure. I think the way I would summarize it is I think this type of role is a bridge. I think it's a bridge between the outside world, so bringing societal expectations and needs and trends into the business, understanding our stakeholders at every level of the company, and bringing that back in, but translating that into the so what for the business. How do we integrate that meaningfully into the decisions that we're taking as a business to respond to those trends and needs and expectations, and then vice versa, taking back out how do I take back out what those external stakeholders need to know. But I also think a really important part as you're doing these roles, as you will know, is being that bridge between the local teams at the sites, the community relations teams, the environment teams, um, and making sure that that knowledge and that understanding is represented and is having weight at the table for senior leadership as well.
What I think is really interesting about your career experiences is the fact that you got to work in a consumer facing area of the business with the diamond business and at work, really interfacing with the end consumer, which is something that in operating mining companies don't always get to experience.
It was an absolutely fantastic experience, and I learned so much from the teams in our consumer facing businesses about what consumers care about, what they expect from the products they buy, particularly from a luxury product like diamonds. You would expect the bar to be a lot higher, and it absolutely should be. But also how the importance of communication and storytelling to engage people in being part of that change and the advocacy. I think coming from a very technical discipline like social performance, community relations, community development, and working with very technical disciplines around mining like engineering and so on, I definitely underappreciated the skill and the power behind good, compelling, engaging storytelling, and the power that that can have to really engage people in positive change. And working with our brands and marketing teams on really purpose-led um, communication, but working with partners like National Geographic, who have absolutely understood that for a long time. Their mission is combining really deep, rigorous science with really compelling, beautiful storytelling. You get completely lost in National Geographic, videos and materials, because they understand that that's how you change the world. That's how you engage people. That's how you excite and motivate and inspire people and make them part of the change. So I think that was an amazing learning experience for me, from going to being really quite skeptical about that as a real skill to understanding it's absolutely essential if we want to get anywhere.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to pause there, is because I generally find within the mining industry that we underestimate and underappreciate that aspect and the storytelling and the beautiful storytelling that we could be doing about the value that we are bringing the world, and that you were so immersed in that. And now you are more in what you say a technical role or within the company.
I think there has been a real shift over the last few years in um, mining understanding that the more that those disciplines are proactively and upfront part of the early design, the planning, the decision making, the more value that those teams can bring to the business. ICMM and working with a research consultancy called GlobeScan that some people will know well, did a survey last year. I don't know if you saw it, on trust across. They interviewed members of the public, 30,000 people across 32 countries. And mining came out in almost every single country as the lowest ranked out of 18 sectors in terms of trust and in terms of contribution to society. Which I think, when I took that into our exec team, they were shocked. They knew that there was a trust deficit, but that really put some data behind it. And that's something that the sector really does need to address because, in terms of critical minerals, I think there's more and more awareness of we need copper, we need iron ore, we need lithium, if we're going to achieve this, the energy transition. And so back to your point on communication, I mean, I think you've probably heard this as well. If I had $1 for every engineer who said to me, well, if we could just communicate better, people could just understand it better. And I think we know that it's not just about communication. It's about performance. I mean, trust is built on competence. Do people trust that you can actually competently, manage these issues? It's about empathy. Do they believe that you have their best interests at heart? Are you actually willing to listen, to understand? It's about integrity. So are you delivering? Are you doing what you said you would do? And it's about consistency. It's about predictability. And all of that points to a mining sector that is more open, that is listening, that is engaging and willing to listen to understand with its stakeholders, particularly local communities, and better communication, better transparent communication, more open communication, but certainly more compelling communication is definitely a big part of that.
I think we do have to tell our story better, and taking your lens and your experience, for example, partnering with National Geographic and their high level way of explaining things that often are quite scientific in a way that resonates with people. But what I always say to that is, I'm only hearing you and taking into account what you have to say if I trust you. And right now, I don't trust you. So you can
Absolutely.
talk all you want and in very beautiful graphic ways, but I don't trust you. I will admit, last year I was in a bubble away from mining. That's part of the impetus of doing this podcast, is because I intensely reconnected with my mining network, um, and realized that the stories of the mining network and the people I've worked with are incredible. But I missed the study. And I hadn't seen that survey around trust in industries and that the mining industry ranking so low and in so many countries. But I do see it as a call to action of really understanding not just more what we can tell people, but more why aren't people hearing us, and appreciating that you've had so much on the ground experience hearing that external point of view in different ways, and that there's this bridge of bringing that perspective back to a company.
I think the people, I mean, you just referenced the people, right? You work with incredibly passionate, incredibly talented people, and the ability for mining, when it is done right, to have outsized positive impact is very, very real. But we need to keep innovating, keep pushing ourselves. We have to acknowledge that in the past, and acknowledge that just because the products are needed, that's not, there needs to be more than that. And I think be willing to listen to more diverse views, and to respond and act on that. And have more diverse talent within the sector is a big part of that as well. It's something I'm really passionate about. But truly believe that if we can attract and retain a wider diversity of people within the sector, then we will be able to address these longer term challenges in a much more successful way.
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. And to me, it's just so obvious. Wouldn't we want all of these diverse perspectives to inform what we're doing? and the challenges of getting them inside the company.
Back when you and I were first working together 14 years ago, um, we were regularly the only women in meetings, and now, I mean, we have remote operating centers for our mines in Chile and Peru, and it's amazing when you walk into them. It feels completely different. The number of young women that are running the data analytics and the different operating stations and communicating with the managers at the mine, you know, all the way through from the pit through to the port, and making real time decisions, engaging with them. And that, you know, these new skills around automation and data analytics and so on, people don't historically have those in the sector. So it's people who are coming through university now who are developing those skills. So it's not as gendered in terms of those professions. We've also found that you need not just those tech and mining skills, but also you need the what we used to call the soft skills. We increasingly, I think, are realizing that they're the hard skills around communication, collaboration. How do you get alignment, the critical thinking side? And so that combination is really opening up opportunities for much more diverse demographic of people to really enter the mining sector and thrive in it as well.
The gender lens that you just put on top of that, and how, and I would also add, you know, I understand that the remote centers tend to have more flexible working arrangements, um, that allow
Exactly.
this more diverse um, swath of the community that can have the opportunity to participate. So that's a really good example. And so I want to ask you though, what is the most important issue that you're working to solve today?
I think the shift from moving into more proactive upfront integration into strategy and planning. So last year we integrated strategy and sustainability together. So I sit on the strategy and sustainability leadership team alongside peers in strategy, portfolio management, business development, and social impact. And that has really, I think, moved us quite a long way towards integrating these issues and these objectives across those areas that I mentioned into how we think about strategy, how we think about managing our portfolio, how we think about how we allocate capital, and how we integrate it really meaningfully into our long, medium, and short term planning. And that's how you start to get really tangible delivery on the ground. So,
What I think you laid out so well is helping other colleagues understand the very concrete perspectives and benefits and realities of sustainability at the company, that it isn't this esoteric long term concept of moving the ship from one direction to the other very slowly. While you're doing that, yes, there are very short term, very tangible items that a sustainability perspective helps the entire business meet.
and I always tell people sitting in corporate functions, people sitting in senior leadership teams, that the people that have the hardest job in the company by a very long way are the community relations teams, on the ground. The teams who are doing that work every day of being our external ambassadors in the community and bringing um, that understanding back into the company, and sometimes having to tell people what they don't want to hear, right? Because people would like things to be simpler. And a lot of these issues that we're talking about and that you've been talking about on your podcast are complex.
So I'm working with this individual at a company right now who's new to the role. And one of the things that I coached him, or I've been coaching him in, is you got to get used to the uncomfortable, because you are the first face that's going to hear sometimes uncomfortable feedback. And that is part of your role, is to hear that and bring that back to the company so that the company can make more informed decisions. But in that moment, it is not comfortable. And we sat there all together with the team recently, and everyone was, after this challenging meeting, was like, okay, guys, this is what uncomfortable feels like. We're in it. Let's just recognize it. And if that's your role every day, yeah, it is right to recognize that. So I like that you called that
That's
out.
great. That's
Good.
great advice, I think, that you're giving, and I think it's there was some fantastic research, um, maybe about 10 years ago, done by the Centre of Social Responsibility in Mining at Queensland. So Deanna Kemp and her team, and it was about just analysing and understanding where there had been conflict around mining, the root the root causes of that, and how many of those were external and how many of those were internal. Two that have always sort of stayed top of mind for me was number one, that turnover in community relations teams and the roles that are externally facing has a really, really significant impact on levels of conflict, because people trust people. People don't trust companies or organizations or institutions. People trust people. That's where the relationships are held. So I think really protecting those teams, making sure that their work, they feel and know that their work is valued, and that we're looking after them, because it is definitely a role that people tend to be very passionate in, and high risk of burnout. And the second one was internal misalignment. So where the information flow is not getting through the organization, or the competing objectives of different departments internally is blocking that information flow, and the right decisions being made. Um,
Exactly. So what emerging issues should the industry be more focused on?
I think in the environmental space, um, we're all going to have to get very focused on physical footprint of mining. When you look at the data around the critical minerals and the energy transition, and the number of new mines that will require to achieve the Paris agreements on climate, um, the scale of mining that will be required, alongside investing in the infrastructure around recycling and more efficient use of metals and so on, they're all parts of the puzzle of what we need. The next one around physical footprint is really around waste. So tailings, and waste from mining that require significant land. We have a program called Future Smart Mining, which is really focused on technology and innovation, and innovation in the tech space, innovation in the social space, right across the sustainability spectrum. And we have, as part of that, our Woodsmith project, which is underneath a national park in the North York Moors. Um, it is just incredible going to visit that project. I mean, when it is built, it's partway through being built. It is all underground. It's literally like going down into something from James Bond. It's all high tech, it's all underground, and it has a 29-kilometer tunnel to get the product out to the coast, out to the port. So on the surface, it literally looks like there are two barns there. That's all you can see. Um, it's all the biodiversity work around the site. It's already net positive in terms of biodiversity. And you can imagine getting something permitted with local support in a conservation area, in a national park, very, very challenging, quite rightly. And the design of this is it's just incredible, and with very strong support from local communities. And we're now doing the same at our Sakatti copper project in Finland, where everything will be entirely underground, and will be carbon neutral, very close to waterless. So the technology and innovation is definitely accelerating and advancing, but I think that physical footprint will be really important. The second one, I would say, in the social space is around community participation in decision making, and the growing expectations of that. And there's a whole spectrum of community engagement involvement, sort of from informed right the way through to partner. But the expectations now, and I think absolutely, if you're really thinking about long term the role that you're playing within the region, within your operating, co-designing that long-term vision around regional development, and then what is the mine's role as part of that. It should not be the only role. It's not the only actor within that ecosystem within that region, but how do you do that together? So there we have the Quellaveco project in the south of Peru, and when you and I first met, it was actually in the middle of a dialogue table process, which was fairly unique at the time, where the company sat down around a dialogue table with I think around 18 to 20 regional, local, institutional, community stakeholders, including the regional government, and spent 18 months, redesigning elements of that project, and redesigning the water system so that we were taking naturally polluted water from one local river and using that for the mine, but the dam was designed to provide fresh water instead, back to the local communities, and designing sort of social development commitments and local employment commitments as well. And that process, I mean, when we went into that, the company thought that would take around 3 months. It ended up, I think, taking 6 months just to agree the terms of reference, which was an important learning, I think, around timelines. But it was 18 months to get that agreed, and that really provided a very different foundation of trust in a country which had experienced a lot of conflict and negative legacy around mining, and that wasn't achieved and then done. I mean, we talk about this concept of social license to operate, and of course it's not a license, it's not a permit, it's not take and done. It's something you're working at constantly every day, to maintain and to nurture. And Quellaveco has been through its project cycles, but that team has really worked over the year to deliver against those commitments, to build that trust, to put really innovative participative monitoring mechanisms in place, working with those same stakeholders on, okay, so what's the next stage of this? What does the regional development look like? And what is the role that Quellaveco plays in the long-term development of Moquegua, of that region? And so how do we start to build more that kind of thinking, that kind of collaboration and co-creation with local stakeholders for the long term into how we design and build and operate mines right from the beginning? And I think there will be more and more expectation around that. What do you think?
Well, I want to reflect back on land and physical land. I spent a year in the renewable energy industry, and that for me was front and center of how much land it takes to have a field of solar panels. And in the industry, you take one large company, but there are a number of large companies, and the cumulative footprint of building solar fields. And even though wind technically takes up less footprint, you have to look at it in the aggregate. In some of these other um, forward-thinking clean energy development opportunities, it takes a tremendous amount of land. And when you start articulating that in terms of how many hectares or acres that is going to take, and you say, don't think about this project in terms of megawatts, because the industry talks a lot about megawatts, and we're going to deliver, 50 megawatts of power. I said, just only tell me that in terms of how many hectares of land you need. And when you start doing that, and then you couple the mining industry and you put that all together of what we need for this new world and this new economy, it is mind blowing. So I really like how you phrased that as physical land. It seems almost trite, like, of course, physical land. But in this growth trajectory of critical minerals, we have to have that front and center. And then the other lens of that is, as soon as I would be in those conversations and say, now, don't tell me about megawatts, just tell me about how much land that is. And I say, let's just use as a proxy for, say, 500 acres of land. How many new community members is that? I think in this portfolio, and that's just one company, what about multiple companies? very quickly, because that is a big difference between the energy industry and the mining industry. The projects are quite quick. Is very quickly, we're about to have 1 million new community members in our areas of influence. Let's think about that. And where is that at the forefront of our decision making? And if that land impact and if those people impacts are not at the forefront of this industry's decision making, we are missing the mark. So, already at the tail end of our discussion, I always like to bring the conversation back to people and people in your life and people you personally impact. Who have been your mentors and sponsors along the way?
I think more than formal mentors, it's been more about learning so much from all of the teams and the people that I've worked with, and so whether that's the businesses and the teams at the operations in the countries that I've worked in, or whether that's the different technical disciplines across the business, or whether it's with external partners and thought leaders, around how do we keep continuously improving and pushing ourselves to be better in mining. I just feel you learn something so different from each of those. And I think in terms of peers and networks and colleagues, it's been seeing the senior women, the women becoming more and more senior, taking on more and more senior roles, moving out of sustainability sometimes into CEO roles and other exec team roles, having more and more influence in the sector. And some of them are really fantastic friends and people who I just respect and who motivate me and keep me going and inspire me. And that's just so important to have that, to find your people and have that network. And then on the sponsor side, I think it's something that a lot of people underestimate the importance of, particularly early on in your career. And I'm certainly very aware of how lucky I've been with the sponsors that I've had, through my career. And so I'm very aware now that I'm in the rooms more often when the decisions are being made about opportunities, about promotions, about our talent development, that I use my voice in that room to speak up for people who I know are talented, bring diverse perspectives, will add a lot of value, and who are not in the room themselves. And so I need to advocate for them. And I'm very aware that doing that across people who are working in these sustainability and social roles is incredibly important, because we need them to be in our leadership pipelines and exec leadership teams of the future.
And just one more minute before we go, a minute's worth of advice for others in this field to have success.
This is a fascinating career. I would say grab every opportunity to learn, even the ones that you think you won't be interested in. You learn from everything. I would say get some experience at site or in country teams early on, because it really gives you an insight that's invaluable later on in your career. And I would really say, and actually this probably applies to anyone young and starting out, but particularly going back to what you said about getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, I would say really try to build the muscle of using your voice early on in your career and having those courageous conversations early, because it's definitely a muscle, and it's definitely something that if you practice, you get better and better at. And so doing that early, I think is really important, and not thinking that you have to wait until you're in a senior position to be able to share that. I think leaning into that early, I would definitely advise strongly.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. I've learned during this discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed this discussion, and I'm honored that you spent this time with us. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.